good afternoon. I'm here with Bassam Hamdi from Briq, and Bassam has a phenomenal company that he's going to talk to us about. Good afternoon, Bassam.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
No, it's great to have you. It's nice to have a Canadian on the show.
A Canadian that's hiding in California, so yes.
They're all hiding in California.
Yeah, exactly. It's 75 degrees here every day, and I think they just got a foot of snow with Toronto. So you know why.
Yeah, no, Toronto's really suffering. Let me. I have a couple of questions to ask you,
Sure.
and we're really fascinated by your company. Congratulations on your
Thank
success.
you so much. I appreciate that.
So look, I've been writing a lot. I just published my book on how technology is transforming infrastructure, and it's one of the biggest disruptors. What do you see in terms of how technology is going to transform the infrastructure industry in the U.S., North America, globally over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think that, I think you said it best, that, America is becoming a developing nation again. That we're in a situation where we don't know what's wrong, we don't know how to fix it, and we don't know how long it's going to take or how much it's going to cost to fix it. So there's a lot of unknowns here, and we have a ton of different variables. Technology and other industries have helped without those variables. But as any good construction professional knows, this is not a manufacturing industry. We're not like a company that builds widgets with an assembly line. We still get rained out, just like baseball. So there's a lot of variables in that equation. It's a tough equation. It's actually one of the hardest data science problems probably in the world. How much, how long, and what? The what portion, is being covered by, I think, a lot of great companies out there. There are companies that are going out there and doing asset analysis, predictive analytics on failures, looking at things that have happened, like the 35E bridge, and evaluating whether or not they could have been avoided, and what the forward indicators are that may predict another failure. So failures are the catastrophic side of it, and a lot of great companies working on that side of it. We're more focused on the how much and how long. And we have a specific, very large infrastructure client who'd been doing work for Caltrans for some time. And we're able now to analyze the type of project, the delivery method, even the project manager, the superintendent, the material suppliers, the equipment suppliers, to come up with a model, essentially, a business model, just like a company. Look at a project as a little company, sometimes a big company, and look at that model and say, if this is on track, the spend should look like this, the productivity should look like this, change orders should look like this, material deliveries and buyout should look like this, if it's on track. If it's off track, have anomaly detection. So the simplest way to describe Briq is an anomaly detection machine.
Okay.
Things are happening that shouldn't be happening. They're either going to impact the end date or they're going to impact how much you've spent. And I think that key concept is lost on a lot of great people out there. And I'll just tell you one quick second why. I think we got companies that are focused on the design workflow. You got the Bentleys, Autodesk to a lesser extent in infrastructure. You got these guys that are doing great work on the design workflow. And then you have folks that are really focused on the document workflow, RFIs, change orders, meeting minutes, Procore, Plan Grid. Those guys are doing great there. Nobody's focused on the money workflow. That's the world, the foggy world of 30-year-old accounting systems. That money workflow is what Briq is trying to break open.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What's your background? Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I started, I was the only person in my family that went to business school. My grandfather was an engineer. Both my uncles are engineers. My dad's an engineer, a very notable environmental engineer. When I said I went to business school or was going to business school, they thought I was like the black sheep of the family. You're going into business school. What are you doing? So I actually went into banking for about a year in London, England. And then I was like, I hate banking. So I got back on a plane, went to Canada. It was .com 1.0, and I joined a startup called CMIC. We were a
Uh-huh.
rounding error, as they used to call us, in the accounting software space. And it was
Right.
1999, and I got to go on the road implementing software with some of the best contractors on the planet. Turner Construction, DPR, Chimbro, Holder, Hardin. Had a great time. American Infrastructure. Had an awesome time, but hated implementing. And I ended up taking over product and then eventually being their chief marketing officer. So really spent, although my education or my degree comes out of business school, my education comes from the trenches of construction, superintendents throwing cell phones at me and a lot of yelling and getting payroll out at 4 o'clock in the morning so the unions show up at work the next day. Those are the types of experiences I loved. And then I did get to join another startup after a long run at CMIC called Procore. And
Okay.
Procore, was a slightly larger than when I joined CMIC. It was about 100 employees, and we grew that within 3 years. And then I had told my wife I wanted to be an entrepreneur for a pretty long period of time, and she said, stop bothering me with this unless, you're going to do something about it. And I did. And I started Briq with the best man for my wedding, Ron Goldschmidt, and with a very simple thesis. In 2018, shouldn't we know how much a project is going to cost?
Yeah.
I don't know. Here's a crazy idea. Let's go in with some form of cost certainty. And it's turned into quite a journey. One of the fastest growing construction tech startups ever, solving real problems. Generally, we sell to the office of the CFO, not operations. The CFO is the one doing the books. So we sell our software to the office of the CFO. That's where we are.
That's fantastic. That makes a huge amount of sense, and it's a nice story. Talk a little bit about your data center contracts, if you would, and how is this? One of the things that we see is that big data, the fourth industrial revolution, are going to transform the infrastructure industry. So those are sort of two different kinds of things. But what you're doing with
Sure.
data centers, and then maybe talk a little bit about how you see, because I've been writing a lot about digitization, electrification, and the industry is just not what people in Washington seem to think it is.
Yeah, talking about data centers, it's actually just a different type of infrastructure project, right? So it's moving data instead of trucks. And you got cabling, you got very complex hubs. Think of it like an airport. If you think of that hub, the data's got to get in and it's got to get out, and it's always got to be on. So you can't have something that turns off often. That complexity is, and in general, just like everything in construction, not only are data centers a prototype, they're a really complex prototype. We're only going to build that thing once too. So
Right.
I see a couple of good things happening with data center projects that even some of the more traditional infrastructure companies can look at. They really chunk their projects into these really manageable systems and areas. And if you go all the way back to Intel in the 90s, they actually blew up the cost code structure and said, you know what, we're going to focus on systems and areas, and we'll put cost code at the end. But what are we doing? What are we installing? Are we installing HVAC? Are we installing raised flooring? And then where are we installing it? First level, second level, quad 1 versus quad 2. That type of thought process, while very common sense oriented, connecting what you're building with how you're spending it,
Right.
that was revolutionary, still is to a lot of people. You walk into a project, you look at a cost report, a commercial project, concrete 03300 tells me nothing. Yeah, we spent $1 million on that, but what did we really do? So I think data centers have this opportunity, if you look at data center construction, to reinvigorate cost accounting at the construction level. And then when you take that one step further, and we talk about the government impact on infrastructure, the question is, does the government have professionals that understand the delivery methods, the complexity, and what we're actually doing on these projects? And I think there's too much of a disconnect between owners and the delivery of the actual, that mile of road or that mile of cable. There's too much of a disconnect. And then we always question, why there's that disconnect. There needs to be thought leaders on the government side as well that actually understands what's happening. And with Mayor Pete in the seat, we'll see what happens. And I think we already see him reaching out to some industry professionals to understand what the next step is in infrastructure, but we have a long way to go, because right now we've been talking about infrastructure bills since I lived in England 22 years ago. So
Right.
I mean, now's the time to actually write a check and get stuff done, because honestly, you drive on our roads, you drive on some of our roads, some of our bridges, you can see it crumbling around us. So it's
Right.
time. I think the other impact is we have to engage with less urban areas as well. So rural America, getting cabling, getting internet, it's really interesting that, Elon Musk's satellite internet just basically gives up on the entire concept of getting cables anywhere or doing any kind of infrastructure project. It's actually, in his mind, easier to launch a rocket into space than run an infrastructure project. And maybe we should find out why that is and make it better.
Yeah, that's a real good point. I mean, one of the things I say often is that, that infrastructure is sort of the last data-free zone of our economy, right? I mean, so people have opinions because there's no data. In other places, people have data.
It's
Another
true.
thing I wanted to get at in terms of, the construction industry, the infrastructure building industry is not overly profitable, right?
Right.
Somewhere between, it's single digits. Can you
Single.
talk about the issue of money management in the industry and how Briq, you've talked about that a little bit, but how does, I mean, you sound more like an evangelist than anything else. How can Briq really address these issues?
I think that money workflow that I talked about earlier is the much maligned part of the project. Somebody wants to, design software says what's going to be built, and project management software is how it's going to be built. And then the money part of it is this really sad, forgotten part of it. Um, it's because there's a lack of accountability. And it's not that anybody's being malicious, but a project manager and a superintendent or a foreman's job is to, you know, to do the work. Doing the work means following the design, following the specifications,
Right.
getting it done. Honestly, it's secondary on how much it costs. It really is. And if you've ever worked a commercial project, you'll know that is very, very true. You're going to go in and, if an owner comes to you and asks you to do a little bit extra, or you hit an environmental condition that costs a little bit more, you don't just stop, raise a hand, and ask for a change order. It just doesn't happen. They just do the work and then hope for the best at the end. The
Right.
idea here that every contractor loses leverage every week you get closer to closeout. And then you expect the owner to write the check for these massive changes that happened 6 months ago, 9 months ago. It's a fallacy. It's a fantasy land. You're never going to get that money. That's why we're in single digits. Somebody's got to be handling the purse strings, and nobody wants to do it. So I
Yeah.
always go back to Turner Construction, my days at Turner. And there was an awesome guy there, their VP of job cost, named Bob Myers. He was in his 60s then, and he was this wonderful man that knew everything about construction finance. He created their own forecasting system. He called it Turner Forecasting System. He knew everything. They were big enough to have something called a cost engineer. So there was a cost engineer and a project manager. The cost engineer managed the budget, the end date, how things were going to roll out. Turner had large enough projects and the business was frothy enough to afford a cost engineer on every project. Not the case anymore. Margins are slimmer. I can't go hire a project accountant that knows modeling today.
Right.
You need a cost engineer in a box, and that's what Briq is, right?
Okay.
So going in and saying, hey, I'm going to guess how much this thing's going to cost at the end. That's great. The project manager knows a lot. Tell me how much you think this is going to cost. But then you need a computer, let's call it what it is, that also augments that forecast with things that a human might not know, like weather conditions and seasonality and cost of labor and cost of materials and historic performance and productivity rates and the fact that equipment's going up in price. So you need those models augmented by human behavior. So that's the key differentiator. Get a cost engineer, a project accountant in a box. The other thing that I think is happening, which is great in the industry, is there are a lot of young people that are joining our industry with no experience in construction. So that
Right.
experience differential is what's causing some of the issues on cost delivery. And so really, when you talk about not the project delivery, the revenue in place per month, that's where you get in trouble on cash flow. So at 8%, you're going to be dipping into your line of credit at least twice a year. At 3%, you're dipping into your line of credit 4 times a year on average. There's a big, big problem when we're living under the poverty line in construction 4 times a year.
Right.
So we got to fix that. That's a problem that's got to be fixed.
That's a really good point. And you highlighted the issues with government earlier as well. And I think that's really, really important, because that's one of the big things that we see is a lack of trust and a lack of shared expertise across the public and private sectors.
100%. I mean, the P3, we see it working in some places, we see it not working in other places. I think it had the right kernel of an idea. P3s being public-private partnerships. It worked a little bit better in, I think, a somewhat a center-left environment like Canada and Australia, where there was a little bit more government intervention into the economy. When you see a P3 here, the jury's still out as far as I'm concerned. Where we see interesting things happening, though, is when you sell a stretch of road to a private equity firm that has a profit motive and has understands what an NPS score is, right? So if you want a net promoter score to ride that portion of the highway, and they want to charge people for that portion of the highway, that portion of the highway usually is your smoothest, has the best exits, has the most lit signage. So there is, without sounding, like we're radicalizing everything, it's like there is a concept of privatizing infrastructure that can work and
Sure.
can work quite well. I don't know if the government's the best owner of anything. Past performance indicates they're probably not. So understanding that, maybe looking at companies that may have a profit motive to drive infrastructure planning might be something we would help.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, an entity that has $30 trillion in debt is probably not a great owner of anything right now. That's right. That's the challenge, and that's what right. We're all trying to address. You guys were fantastically successful last year. Everybody's in lockdown, and you grew 330%. Yeah. How'd you do that?
Well, it was interesting. So we were, like everybody, scared in March when the lockup started, and we're like, what are we going to do? So we didn't do anything. We didn't lay anybody off, and we said, okay, just keep on calling and see if these CFOs still pick up the phone. And so we were growing, but we weren't growing as rapidly as we did last year. And we pick up the phone, and we, 2 months before COVID, you'd pick up the phone and say, do you now need financial planning software for projects and your company? And they would say, that sounds like a nice to have. We have so much money, everything's coming in, we have so much. And it's like, okay. So we're selling a little bit, and then we call them up and say, do you need financial planning software that plans profit, revenue, and headcount? They're like, yeah, I'm trying to do it, over Zoom in Excel spreadsheets that break over the cloud, and I'm trying to use Google Sheets, and it's not connected to anything. My accounting software is 1,000 years old, and it exasperated all these massive issues with everything they were doing. And it's like, and I just laid off 4 accountants, so I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Sorry. That is literally what that was the answer, and we sold out of it. Let's just put it that way. There's a large series of contractors that came on board very quickly, and they know we're solving a hard problem for them. There's joining a startup and being part of a startup as a customer or as an employee is a roller coaster ride. It's the best job I've ever had, but it is a roller coaster ride. So as we grow, we're hiring and we're building the engine to the car in the middle of the race. So there's a lot of things that have happened that have been fun over the last year, and fun being unexpected, but the growth has been very well welcome. We've hired rapidly. I think what's interesting is we're trying to hire basically cost engineers at Briq, so to help build these models. And the skills are really hard to find. Yeah. Like, you're really, really hard pressed. You want somebody that's technical and understands accounting and understands financial planning. That's a unicorn employee. And I think that's a big part of our secret sauce, because the more you can automate that away from the human, The more that can be automated, the less human resources you need to do forecasting, WIP, cash flow analysis, revenue recognition, what have you. So part of that growth is finding the right people. So if anybody's interested and has a cost engineering background, please reach out.
That's right. When we edit this video, we'll stamp "looking to hire" on top of your.
Hiring rapidly, yes.
I've got to think too that you have the right personality for this job. I mean, it really sounds like you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah, I like construction people. Some of the younger folks that we hire at Briq, when I get on a phone with, first of all, everybody knows everybody in construction. So, once your circle expands, I was sitting at a EO meeting, it's called Entrepreneur Organization. And in this thing called a forum, a guy, I never met him. It's a group of 10, I just joined. And the guy sitting next to me, he's like, oh, my name's Jeff. I work at a contractor in San Francisco. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I used to work with contractors in San Francisco. He's like, which one? I said, DPR. And then we all know the same people. And there's like one individual that we knew that always cried in accounting. Like, is that person still there? Like, it's just that kind of family. That's why I love construction. Big fish in a very small pond.
That's great.
But the other part of it is that you can be real with them. And so contractors will ask for crazy things. And sometimes you have to say, whoa, slow down. Sometimes technologists that we hire from outside the industry don't understand that. So they don't realize that contractors are in the business of pushing their vendors around sometimes. So it's a fun industry that way.
That's super interesting. That really is. It's fantastic. And, I love your enthusiasm as well. So that's great. Hey, listen, there's all this talk about a Biden infrastructure plan. You mentioned earlier, we've been having the same conversations for the last 20 or 30 years. Do you see anything new this time that suggests it's actually going to happen?
Maybe we'll have the Democrats are gonna, run the Senate and the House for a while, or at least a year and a half. So could they push something through? If they have the internal fortitude, now's the time. I think if they don't push it through in the next year and a half, nothing's gonna happen. I don't think the states can be left to do it, to be honest. I don't think there's enough money or expertise at that level to actually do it. I think that somebody has to have leadership and step in and say, we have, there's a lot of road in America. There's a lot of infrastructure in America that we need to look at. There's defense issues. There's climate change issues. There's road, just basic wear and tear issues. There needs to be leadership. If climate change continues, Death Valley hit 130 degrees.
Oh my goodness.
This summer, I was camping not too far from it near one of those days. It was like being on the sun. What is that? What's going to happen to the infrastructure that continues? How are we going to make the grid keeps on going down? We keep on burning down forests in California. Wires are sparking. Texas thought they were in, a really well protected haven. Now we have the same issues that we have in California and Texas. There are big problems that the states can't handle. Federal government needs to be better positioned to do. There needs to be an infrastructure czar, somebody that's actually running this thing, preferably somebody from the industry, not a bureaucrat, but somebody that's actually ran a contractor before, so that they know. If this is going to work, we have to have guaranteed minimum profit margins. We have to have trust. If something is time and materials plus 8%, give me my 8%. Don't argue about change orders. Let's get this done fast and easy. That's the big problem. If you go to Australia, get a P3, people are publishing their margin, their real margin, a made up margin that we show owners. So that's, we got to be able to go in and say those things and have those tough conversations. And, ABC and AGC, maybe they can help, but we need leadership here that understands that contractors need to make a profit, that we need to be able to hire people from the greater world and train them, because there is a labor shortage in construction. So there's a lot of issues and problems. Mayor Pete's got his work cut out for him, but it's got to happen soon. And if they're just going to go and throw money at the problem, it's not going to, the money will just disappear. It's not going to do anything. They got to have a plan. They got to have somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that it's not just Mayor Pete, right? Because he's siloed and his organization's siloed, but you've got the Department of Energy, FCC. I just bought a Tesla. Where do you put the Tesla? Is it Department of Energy? Is it DOT? And And who's going to set up 5G so I can actually use a Tesla properly, right? I mean, there's just a lot of issues out there.
Yeah.
But anyway, listen, I just want to thank you. This was really fantastic, Bassam, and phenomenal. Congratulations on the success of your company.
Thank you so much. This is really enjoyable. Anytime.
Thank you.